Hello lovely people, welcome to another book chat, the weekly roundup of stuff I've read at some point in my past. Why is that so hard for me to remember sometimes?
Doobie 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 doo. Doobie 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 Sophie vlogs.
I've got 3 books to talk about this week. I would like to kick things off with an absolute beast. This is The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel. I've been reading this for so long. I'm aware that like for my concept of so long is not quite the same as other people's concepts of so long, but I do feel like this book has become like a real presence in my life, both like physically and mentally. So to be done with it does make me feel a bit strange. This is the 3rd book in Hilary Mantel's Thomas Cromwell series. I would normally say that I will talk about things spoiler free if they're like a sequel. Kind of don't know if I can do that because it's history, you know? Essentially, I will just talk about my thoughts on it. I've been really enjoying working my way through this series. It's been a really interesting perspective on a time period that I feel like has been written about so extensively, and I always think that's a real achievement to make like the Tudor times feel fresh, you know, because it's just one that we have explored so deeply. And I think that this focus on Thomas Cromwell, but also the focus on other people within the text, is really what helps achieve that. For example, like the focus on the Spanish ambassador, I always found really interesting because it's like he's not a character that I have really felt super included in these sorts of narratives before. Similarly, I really enjoyed the portrayal of Jane Seymour. I feel like she's so often just like, oh yeah, like she was really quiet, she gave Henry the son and then she died. Whereas the glimpses you get of Jane I find so tantalizing because it's like, is there a little bit more going on under the surface than you might think? That sort of thing. I find that characterization really intriguing. My friend had a really interesting thing to say about this because she's lent me the whole series. She said that someone said to her that each of the books in this series is like being presented with a slightly different version of Cromwell, you know, because obviously by this point he's a much older man. This version of Cromwell is very reflective. There are a lot of returning to the past. I will say occasionally some of these ruminations on the past, when I was like in the depths of the book, I was just like, could we not have edited some of them? Because it's a very long book. But I think they were really effective in sort of showing you that this is an older Thomas, and also certain moments are returned to quite frequently. One example of this is the execution of Anne Boleyn, and I feel like I was trying to pay attention to how the perspective changes the different times he returns to things, you know, like the portrayal of Anne Boleyn's downfall and execution in Bring Up the Bodies compared to how it's portrayed in here, and especially how it's portrayed in here as Thomas's own downfall sort of comes upon him. There was definitely a lot of moments in this where I could see him overreaching, I could see him making mistakes, I could see his focus on like accumulating wealth and people's lands and stuff like this, which automatically reminded me of Wolsey and how like Henry took Hampton Court from Wolsey because, you know, like if you accumulate so much that the king notices and gets jealous, that's not good for you. Stuff like that. I also was really paying attention to metaphors. In Bring Up the Bodies, there's a whole like hawking hunting metaphor, but it's very much to the benefit of Thomas Cromwell, like he is the hunter. Whereas in this, I became so aware of how often hunting dogs are mentioned, whether like in world as like we are hunting, or rather not hunting because the king can't hunt very well anymore, or just used as metaphors, used as similes, and very much to the detriment of Thomas now. Like it's on like the hunting dogs are after him, are turning on their master, that sort of thing. So there are probably so many other metaphors that I didn't pick up on this first read because I was so occupied with noticing every time a hunting dog was mentioned. But that was a real strand that really like stuck out to me. And as this goes on, you can really see like the turning on him. People who you would expect to turn on him, who are like acknowledged as enemies, but then people who you think are friends. And one thing that I really felt with this is like, I know the history. I know how it's gonna go. But when certain people turned on him, even though I expected it to happen, because I've been so rooted in these characters, I had the same sense of betrayal that he has, where you're like, oh, you're the one interrogating him? And that was just like, I think that was really fabulous that even when you know what's going to happen, you're still just like, maybe it could not. Another thing I really love doing with these is noticing when the titles are used, so the mirror and the light, like being used to refer to Henry, but then also like especially that final period when he's in the tower and he's really reflecting, get it? The way he returns to concepts of mirror and concept of light and that sort of thing. Essentially, I think Hilary Mantel is masterful. When I had not quite finished this book, dreamt that I was Thomas Cromwell in the Tower of London awaiting execution. So if that doesn't tell you how immersed I was in this book, I don't know what else will. But suffice to say, a really masterful trilogy. I'm sure this is one that you could return to time and time again and notice different things and pick up on different metaphors and read into it in different ways. And I have to say, I've really enjoyed immersing myself in these books. I really feel like it's rejuvenated my interest in Tudor times and just in historical fiction in general. So I've had a fabulous time. I understand why everyone loves her so much. After that, I read a book on my Kindle. I read Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars because I just think it was wonderful. We follow Tarasai. She's been raised in this place away from the rest of the world by tutors under the instruction of the lady. And then one day the lady tells her that all of this training has been because she's going to be sent to this palace to go through these sort of like trials to become one of the Council of 11 for the Emperor's son. In order to become one of the Council of 11, there's this thing called the Ray, and you have to love him fully, and then you sort of become like linked and that sort of thing. And the lady instructs her that she's going to do this, and when she has gained his love and is part of his council, she instructs her to kill him. And intriguing setup as a start. The world building of this is so detailed and so interesting. I loved it so much. I loved getting this understanding because Tarasai has been raised sort of in seclusion. She's such a great vehicle for you as the reader understanding the world because she's been given all this knowledge. She's been trained to be really good at these things, but also she has very little like real world experience. I just found her such a compelling perspective to be following, and I really feel like this book has such complexity to it. First of all, like I had a sense of what might be happening based on that sort of plot setup, and I really liked the way that she sort of like played with that a bit. Like there were things, the way that I might have predicted it would go, it did not go. We had some twists, we had some turns, and I really appreciated like being kept like a little bit. I was always like, oh, I have like an idea, but might not be correct, and I really enjoyed sort of being like, I'm just gonna have to see, I guess. I thought the characters were really compelling. They're sort of like a core little cast that are the ones that you really grow to like know and love, and I definitely felt like they were really strongly characterized. Some of that Council of 11 were much more like background characters, but that kind of makes sense, I think, because there's sort of, I feel like there's a little bit of a limit to like the number of characters we could have really included given the nature of this story. And my favourite thing is really like complexity of character. There are people in this that that are kind of villains, but they're given such nuance and depth that like it's not that I'm rooting for them, but like I understand their motivations. And people that you might want to, in a simpler narrative, you would just hate. It's slightly harder to hate because you understand their background, you understand how they got to the way they are. Maybe the actions that they're doing are not what you would agree with, but like, boy do I understand the logic and thinking behind them. But equally, the attitude to, you know, like a narrative sets up problems and then towards the end tries to resolve those problems. And the way that the resolution was given, there were easy options and they weren't taken. We went down some of these more morally complex routes, and I just, oh, the ideas, the world building, the characters. I loved this so much. I even kind of liked the romance, which for me with this type of book is like, I usually think the romances are fine, but actually, like, I was compelled by the journey. There's an asexual character, which I really appreciated. There was just, oh, I just, you know when I like a book, because I start to say fragmented sentences, and I wave these little hands around, and I go, I just. So, this is a duology. I am so interested to pick up the second book when it comes out, and I'm so intrigued about where she's going to take this world, because things are resolved, but also nothing is resolved, you know? The final book I want to talk about is a really small little non-fiction book This is The Little Book of Pride by Laney. The History, the People, the Parades. I picked this up because it's really sweet. It has rainbow sprayed edges. I really like that. This is sort of giving a potted history of Pride. It has a little bit of a background on the UK and UK history. It has a lot of focus on American history. And then it also does include some information about Pride parades around the world. It also has these little sort of spotlight focuses, whether that's on particular little events or people. On the whole, I think that this is a very sweet little booklet. It had two little things which slightly irked me. One is that, given this is very small, the people chosen for some of the spotlights, there were some really great people chosen for the spotlights, like Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, stuff like that, and I really appreciated that. One of the spotlights was on Madonna, and I don't know, maybe it's just because I watched the documentary all about Madonna's dances for the Vogue tour, and that documentary really opened my eyes to the way that she kind of outed some of her dancers and outed them as having AIDS and that sort of thing. I don't disagree that Madonna has said some wonderful things in support of LGBT people and that sort of thing. It's just I felt like we had some quite nuanced takes in here, and maybe the take on Madonna was not as nuanced as it could have been. And then also there was also a shout out on Lady Gaga, and I felt like it failed to acknowledge the fact that Lady Gaga is bisexual, because it was sort of talking about her as an ally, and I was like, but she is part of this community, you know? So a lot of good, a very concise, easy little thing. I wasn't always super sure who the audience was, because the packaging made it seem like it might be for quite young people, but then occasionally some of the language and stuff, I was like, is it for older people? I don't really know. So a perfectly good little concise thing. I felt like it covered some really great areas of queer history. There were just a few tiny niggles that I had at the edges where I was like, this feels like an interesting choice. Definitely a sweet little book. I enjoyed reading it. I just had a few thoughts. That's everything I wanted to talk about this week. As per usual, I would love to hear your thoughts on anything I've talked about. Please do leave a comment down below. Otherwise, I hope you're having a lovely day, and I will see you next time for something different.